Hello everyone, this is Professor Nassar. Today we're going to cover the anatomy of the male reproductive system. Again, I'm going to be using lab unit 4, your lab manual unit 4, as we go through this and referring to the terms on there. So I would suggest you have that out and also the relevant portion of your textbook open so that you can go through this, have those both as resources and references as we go through this together. Okay, let's begin with the external structures of the male reproductive system. This obviously is the penis. The penis, we have two structures they want you to be familiar with. This part, basically the distal end of the penis here that's smooth and not covered by the outer skin of your body, is called the glans penis, G-L-A-N-S. There's no D in glans penis. And then the opening out here through which urine is going to be exiting, and also sperm, depending on the context. I don't know if we can really show it so easily here, but it would be this opening here. That will be the external urethral orifice. I realize right here it looks like the mouth of Pac-Man. It's basically supposed to be a small little duct-like opening right in the center. That is the external urethral orifice. Okay, this then comes off. And we can open it up like that, and then we can see some of the internal features. Let's zoom in a little bit. All right, here is the urethra. This part of the urethra that goes through the main shaft or the body of the penis is called the spongy urethra because it's surrounded by a layer of spongy erectile tissue that is called corpus spongiosum. There are two types of erectile tissue that make up the penis. The first is the thin layer of tissue that surrounds the urethra throughout most of its pathway as it goes through the body of the penis. And that thin layer is called the corpus spongiosum, and you can see it here. At the tip of the penis, the distal end, otherwise known as the glans penis, the corpus spongiosum flares out and forms this sort of mushroom-shaped like cap in humans. So the glans penis, for the most part, through the shaft or the body of the penis, is for the most part a relatively thin tube or column of erectile tissue, but then it flares out to form the glans penis out here. And the glans penis is just simply corpus spongiosum, an expansion of the corpus spongiosum with the urethra running right through it. This thing up here is the second of the erectile tissue bodies. There's actually a right and a left component to this, and the erectile tissue is essentially these sort of reddish circles that you see here, and this erectile tissue is called the corpus spongiosum. This is called corpus cavernosum. This is corpus spongiosum, and this is corpus cavernosum. These erectile tissues are the same thing for the most part. They are just modified epithelial cells or epithelial tissue that expand when they get engorged with blood. We give them different names based on their location so we can discern or distinguish one from the other. The corpus cavernosum up here, there's really two columns of this, a right and a left, and I'll show you this better in the second of the two models we go through. But you can see that the corpus cavernosum up here is surrounded by this white tissue here, which is supposed to represent connective tissue. This connective tissue is very thick, very fibrous, has lots of collagen fibers in it to prevent it from expanding. This whitish tissue is known as tunica albuginea, meaning the white tunic. It's not listed in your lab handout for you, but other students may need to know this, so I'm just throwing it in there for context, just so you can get an understanding of what this is. So when the corpus cavernosum here fills with, when the erectile tissue swells with blood, the tunica albuginea essentially is a limiting factor and prevents this from sort of getting over swollen. So when this fills up with blood, the tunica albuginea basically adds a rigidity factor to the whole body of the penis, allowing the penis to basically become stiff, and that way allowing for the ease of intercourse to occur. So again, this is corpus spongiosum, corpus cavernosum, and the corpus cavernosum is surrounded by this whitish tissue called tunica albuginea. And you notice the corpus cavernosum and its associated tunica albuginea essentially taper off here right at the junction between the shaft or the body of the penis and the glans. So the glans penis consists of only corpus spongiosum. There is no corpus cavernosum in the glans penis. Okay, the next structure is the testis. The skin that surrounds the testis basically pouches out or expands outward to accommodate the testis when it descends from the abdominal cavity or the pelvic cavity out of the body through the inguinal canal. And so this outpouching or outpocketing of skin is known as the scrotum. And again, it will have pubic hair or sweat glands and other associated epithelial integumentary-like structures associated with it. So this is the scrotum. The testis itself and its associated ductwork have a serous membrane associated with them that surround them and envelop them. That serous membrane is really just the same serous membrane that surround the organs inside your abdominal cavity, which in here would be parietal peritoneum and visceral peritoneum, the serous membrane, which is peritoneum. When the testis, which starts off as an internal organ, migrates and descends its way out of the body cavity, it takes some of that peritoneum along with it. And so that peritoneum that used to be inside the body cavity and now comes outside the body cavity gets renamed as a structure called, a serous membrane called vaginal tunic or tunica vaginalis. And just like how parietal peritoneum has a parietal and visceral layer associated with, or just like peritoneum has a parietal and visceral layer associated with it, so does vaginal tunic. So there's actually a parietal vaginal tunic and a visceral vaginal tunic. The parietal vaginal tunic is basically this thin white layer that you can just barely make out here that's surrounding the outside or lining the inside of the scrotum. The visceral vaginal tunic, visceral tunica vaginalis, is on the testis itself and the other associated structures that go with it. So when you're palpating the testis itself, what you're really palpating or touching is the visceral vaginal tunic. In your lab handout, they don't have you distinguish between parietal and visceral layers. So all we want you to know is that there is vaginal tunic associated with this tissue. And in this case, we could either, I guess, tag it simply on this sort of whitish layer that you see here as the parietal layer, or if they wanted to be a little tougher, they could tag this and say, what's the serous membrane that surrounds this structure? And you would say vaginal tunic, or if you wanted to really be specific, you could say visceral vaginal tunic. But in the end, we're just looking for the term vaginal tunic. So vaginal tunic, peritoneum, they are the same things. They're both serous membranes. The vaginal tunic is the peritoneum once it's been pulled out of the abdominal cavity with the testis. Okay, the testis produces sperm, and when that sperm is ready to go, it goes in and to mature, it gets put into this sort of storage chamber here, which this structure is called the epididymis. The epididymis has three parts to it. There's a head, a body, and a tail. You don't need to worry about those three regions. We just want you to know that this is the epididymis. But I mention that because you can see down here, the tail of the epididymis is what continues along as the next part of this tubing system, which is called the ductus deferens, or the vas deferens. So here is the epididymis, and then the epididymis sort of makes a almost even more than a 180-degree turn here before it makes its way up back into the body cavity as a structure called the ductus deferens or vas deferens. And this will ultimately take sperm or deliver sperm into the urethra as it makes its way around the bladder. So here it is a bit challenging to see where the vas deferens is. You can sort of start to see it right about there, that thin sort of pale line. But then we really lose it in this tangle of blood vessels. You can see the continuation of it after it goes through the body wall here. This is supposed to represent part of your abdominal wall. You can see the rest of it as it courses its way around the lateral edge of the bladder right here. This is your bladder. Here's part of the bladder. Here's another part of the bladder. Here they're trying to show you some of the detrusor muscle, the smooth muscle associated with the bladder. This thing here that looks like it's been a cut off tube. This is your ureter. Don't confuse this tube with this tube. This tube is the ureter. This connects the kidney with your bladder. Urine is traveling through here. This tube that we see here, and also here, going around the edge of the bladder. This is your ductus deferens or your vas deferens. This carries sperm and seminal fluid. In addition to the ductus deferens traveling through here, there is also an artery, a vein, lymphatics, nerves, and other structures associated with running with this as well. And all of these structures together, including the ductus deferens, make up this sort of tangle of structures, which we call the spermatic cord. This is the tissue that wraps around the ductus deferens and includes the testicular artery, testicular vein, lymphatic vessels, nerves, and also the associated vaginal tunic. So all of this together makes up the spermatic cord. And the spermatic cord really runs down to about here and then up to about there as it exits the body cavity in a region called the inguinal ring or the inguinal canal. Okay, next we can see that the urinary bladder is here and here. And other structures are accessory, what are known as accessory sex glands. The testis is producing sperm, but you have other structures that are going to enable the sperm to basically flow more easily through this tubing as it makes its way out of the penis and into the vaginal cavity. And those other structures are called accessory sex glands, and there are at least two of them that we want you to appreciate here in this model. The first one, the larger of the two, is this structure here that sits just inferior to the bladder. This structure is called the prostate gland. Not prostrate, which means to lie down. Prostate. And this other gland is shown here. This is called the seminal vesicles, or sometimes called the vesicular glands. These two glands also produce seminal fluid that helps basically nourish the sperm as it makes its way through this tubing. The prostate gland is essentially a single gland, and the seminal vesicles, there are two of these. There's going to be a left one that you can see here, and then there will be a right one associated with the other side. Now we can remove some of this so we can see some of the other structures associated with this. The first thing I would like you to appreciate is that as the vas deferens makes its way around the bladder, it's ultimately going to drain into the urethra, shown here and shown here. So let's look at this side first. This is the interior of the bladder. This would normally store urine from urine that is draining down via the ureter, shown here. And then it drains via the ureteric orifice, shown right here. Urine will then empty out of the bladder at the base of the trigone and then come down through this duct here that we call the urethra. Surrounding the urethra here is the prostate gland. You can see it's broken up basically into three parts: here, here, and here. All of this is the same gland. It just gets bisected a little bit, or trisected, by these two ducts. This main one here is the urethra. This other duct that's coming into it is called the ejaculatory duct. The ejaculatory duct starts here and ends here, and it is the site of common drainage for both the vas deferens as well as the drainage for this accessory sex gland, the seminal vesicle. We can open this up and sort of take a look there. The drainage for this seminal vesicle would be roughly about here, and as we follow this along to the other side, it has a short drainage tube that meets up with the ductus deferens, which is this. So this hollow space here is the drainage for the ductus deferens. This space here is the drainage for the seminal vesicle, and they both drain together into this tube, which is your ejaculatory duct. So the ejaculatory duct is here. It is the site of common drainage for the ductus deferens and the seminal vesicle. The ductus deferens continues up this way and back this way. But the sperm, of course, is traveling in this direction. So finally, both sperm and seminal fluid drain out of the ejaculatory duct and then into the prostatic portion of the urethra. The prostate gland also produces seminal fluid, just like the vesicular gland. The ducts for drainage for the seminal fluid from the prostate gland are microscopic and drain directly into the prostatic urethra. We will not see the drainage ducts for the prostate gland. Finally, we want you to know the three regions of the male urethra. So the part, again, that goes through the prostate gland is called the prostatic urethra. Then there's a part of the urethra that goes through the body wall. That is not so easily seen on this model. We can see on this side, here is the urethra. Here is the prostate sort of split up into three parts. This would be the prostatic urethra. From here to here is the ejaculatory duct. Ejaculatory duct. This is the drainage for your ductus deferens, and also at some point in here we would see the drainage for the seminal vesicle, but we can't see that opening due to the way this has been cut. There is an additional gland here that you don't need to know, but some students who are watching this may need to know it. It's called the ampulla of the ductus deferens. It's another accessory sex gland. When the ductus deferens joins up with the ejaculatory duct, it has a thicker wall associated with it. There's glandular tissue within the tunic of the mucosa of the ductus deferens, and that's what they were trying to show you here. That's why it gets a little thicker just in this region. Bio 213 students, at least for Rockville, Montgomery College, don't need to know that term. And then the prostatic urethra essentially goes here, and then that's all we see of it until we get down here into this part, which would be called, which is the third part of the urethra. This is called the spongy urethra because it is surrounded throughout its length by the corpus spongiosum. So we have prostatic urethra up here, spongy urethra here. And the very short part of the urethra that goes through the body wall, through the abdominal wall, is called the membranous or intermediate urethra. All right, this is what one of the models looks like, the more two-dimensional sagittal cut. What I want to do is then go to the more three-dimensional model shown here. This also opens up so that we can see some of the inside as well, the interior. Let me zoom out a tiny bit. Okay, so let's again go through the various structures. Again, here is the penis. This is the shaft or the body of the penis. The more distal part is known as the glans penis, and the opening is called the external urethral orifice. This is the exit point through which urine and sperm exit. Before we go into the internal structures, let's just do some more of the external. This is the scrotum, the outpouching of skin. This is the testis, epididymis, and as you follow the epididymis around to its tail, you can see again it does sort of this hairpin turn before it turns into the ductus deferens or the vas deferens, as it's making its way up this direction. So this is here is your ductus deferens, and you can see that's here's the testis, epididymis. Epididymis comes around, makes this bend, and turns into the ductus deferens as it makes its way up through the spermatic cord. And here in this model, you can actually see the ductus deferens a little better. The ductus deferens is all of this light tan structure we see here, surrounded by testicular artery, testicular vein, testicular nerve, lymphatics, and so forth. All of that make up the spermatic cord. Then the serous membrane that surrounds the testis is again called the vaginal tunic. You can see part of it here, this sort of light colored layer. Part of this is going to be other layers as well. There's a tunica albuginea, there's a spermatic fascia that all get incorporated into this too. But we don't have you distinguish between all of those different layers. So I think you'll be okay just knowing that this is called vaginal tunic, and we'll just leave it at that. This would be more of it here, and there's also some smooth muscle, two different types of smooth muscle that are associated with temperature regulation for the testis as well. One of them is called this cremaster, and then there's another muscle called the dartos. You don't need to know those terms for the Bio 213 for Rockville at least. Then we can actually remove this and look sort of inside. Again, you can see that the interior of the penis is basically composed of 3 columns of tissue. Let's zoom in on this. So here, usually to orient myself when I'm looking at a cross-section like this, is first find where the urethra is. See how it looks like 2 eyes and a mouth? Well, this is mouth region here is the urethra. And again, the urethra is always surrounded by a layer of erectile tissue, which we call corpus spongiosum. Then above, the sort of 2 eyes here and the sort of blue structure around them, all of this are the right and left corpus cavernosa. This is the one corpus cavernosum, this is the other corpus cavernosum, and it's surrounded by this thicker, whiter tissue, which is called the tunica albuginea. And again, you can see the same things on the other side here. Then up above, we see the urinary bladder. And when we turn this around on this side, we can see again the bladder, the prostate gland underneath it. And then here, again, these things that look like bull's horns, these are your ureters. Don't confuse them with this tube here, which is your ductus deferens. This is the continuation of the ductus deferens as it comes inside the body. So here's the ductus deferens as it's making its way up through the spermatic cord. And then it comes through and around here and winds its way around the bladder. Comes around the other side. And we see it then, it will drain into the prostate via the ejaculatory duct. This structure here and here are your seminal vesicles or vesicular glands. This structure here and here are your ductus deferens. This again is called the ampullary gland for those who need to know this term. It's the sort of expansion of tissue at the distal end of the ductus deferens. Again, the drainage of sperm from the ductus deferens will join into a common tube with the drainage of seminal fluid from the seminal vesicles, and that common tube is called the ejaculatory duct. So when we open this up, we should be able to see that. And so it would look something like this. The bladder is a bit mobile here, so excuse the jumpiness. We can actually put the rest of the penis on here too. One sec. So the whole thing together would look something like this. So from the top down, we have bladder, and then we have the 3 parts of the urethra. This is the prostatic urethra, and you can see coming in to join it is going to be part of your ejaculatory duct. Again, that's the common site of drainage from the ductus deferens and the ductus deferens and the seminal vesicles. Boy, this model really doesn't want to stay together. Then as the prostatic urethra makes its way through the body cavity, through the body wall, the abdominal body wall, the name of the urethra, the region, the place name we give the urethra changes, and now it's called the intermediate or membranous urethra. It's a very short section, maybe just a few millimeters in length, just that point right there, here, and that's it. Just as it goes through, here's this line here, and this line here represent the abdominal wall, the muscles that make up your belly. And as the urethra goes through that part, and only that part, is called the membranous or intermediate urethra. And then the rest of the urethra here is called the spongy urethra. And again, you can see the corpus spongiosum as it surrounds the urethra the whole way down. And it's rather thin here. It forms this bulb-like region in the back at the root, but it's rather thin here through the body, and then it flares out and expands here to form the glans penis. Up above, you can see the corpus cavernosum. Again, you can see sort of windows of it as the tunica albuginea, this white, thick white connective tissue that adds rigidity to the penis when the penis gets erect, shows pockets of the corpus cavernosum above. Again, the thing to keep in mind is that in human penises, at least, basically from about here to the end, there is no skeletal muscle in this portion of the penis, and there is no bone in this portion of the penis. All of the rigidity is due to erectile tissue, which is basically a modified epithelium, and this connective tissue, the tunica albuginea. All right, apologize for the wobbly model, but that's what we have to work with for today. Thank you for joining me for all of these lectures. I hope you get something out of them. If there are any questions or comments, please just put them in the comment section of the video, and I will be happy to answer them as soon as I get to them. Okay, good luck with your studies, and good luck on your finals, and hope this finds you safe and healthy. Bye-bye.